Platform 9 wants to direct. XAI goes Ethernet, sidestepping some sanctions. Nadella nixes his bonus. OpenAI wants some chips. Salt Typhoon hacks even more phones. And we're going to take a closer look at AMD and Intel's new partnership in this episode of The Rundown. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Gestalt IT Rundown for October 30th. That's right, it is almost everybody's favorite candy-focused holiday, Halloween. And for those of you out there who like to celebrate alternate Halloween, it is National Candy Corn Day. And I know that candy corn is a very polarizing thing, but luckily, we're all fans of all candy here at the Rundown. Joining me is my partner in crime and sweet tooth himself, Mr. Stephen Foskett. Stephen, what do you prefer on Halloween?
God, anything but candy corn. Ew, so nasty. Honestly, the worst. So I can't stand candy corn. The worst, though, even worse, is circus peanuts.
Oh yeah.
Won't go no. But the absolute worst candy are those wax things filled with ew. Don't talk to me about wax lips and wax soda bottles and.
Yeah, I'm with you on that, buddy. No, thank you.
But hey, let's actually rephrase this, Tom. What's your favorite Halloween candy?
Ooh, Tootsie Rolls. By far, Tootsie Rolls.
Tootsie Rolls, huh? I'm a $100,000 guy.
That's fair. The good news, though, is that unlike wax lips and circus peanuts, there are no bad stories in the rundown this week because we have a great big lineup of news. There's been a lot happening in the industry. And I want to start off with some exciting news that we actually got during one of our Tech Field Day events, because Platform 9 has a new solution aimed at private clouds. Their private cloud director helps you build solutions that run on any infrastructure using distributed software-defined networking and container orchestration, cluster resource management, all the things you would expect to see in a private cloud director. And we got to see the details of this during Cloud Field Day 21, as well as some demos of the platform. And of course, as our resident cloud guru, Stephen, you had a front row seat for everything in this big announcement. What impressed you the most from Platform 9?
Well, the thing that impressed me the most was just the overall product. This product looks pretty production ready. It looks pretty enterprise ready. I mean, yes, it's a new product, but Platform 9 is not a new company. If you haven't heard from them before, they have been involved in the private cloud ecosystem literally for a decade. They have a lot of sharp people. They really know this stuff. But this new product, Private Cloud Director, is specifically targeted. Well, you can probably tell what it's targeted at by the list of features. This is essentially a way for organizations to manage their resources between public cloud and private cloud, with virtual machines, with containers, et cetera. Yes, it is absolutely aimed at VMware customers. Like so many products out there are aimed at VMware customers. And the interesting thing for us was at Cloud Field Day, we had VMware presenting Cloud Foundation. We also had Platform 9 talking about their private cloud director. It was interesting because it seemed like, honestly, a positive interaction or a positive reaction to the market. Essentially, VMware under Broadcom is really focusing on their top customers and the needs of their top customers with Cloud Foundation. And frankly, I think that it's a good product. And I think that some of the customers are going to really love it, and some of the customers are really going to hate it. And the customers that hate the direction that VMware is going have some choices. I think that the VMware Private Cloud Director should be one of those choices. It has all the things you're looking for. It does a lot of the same things, in terms of resource scheduling and balancing and all this that you want. But it does it in a way that works in a, non-VMware environment. Give it a look. Maybe you'll like it. One of the coolest things, though, I do want to kind of zoom in here. It came out near the end of the presentation. They were talking about managing Kubernetes. And one of the coolest things that Private Cloud Director does is it is able to directly manage Kubernetes, and it doesn't require all of the container resources that are used typically for the control plane. Essentially, Platform 9 is the control plane that's managing Kubernetes. And what that means is that you can get just a little bit more out of your infrastructure. Because like me, if you've tried to deploy Kubernetes, you found that there's a lot of overhead in that solution. Well, Platform 9 is addressing that by directly managing it without needing to have a separate, a bunch of resources separately as part of the control plane. And of course, it can do the same thing in networking and in storage. It can use external resources. It's a real sharp product, and I was very impressed by it. So anyway, check out the really in-depth Cloud Field Day presentation that we're going to link to in the show notes here, or just use your favorite search engine for Platform 9 at Cloud Field Day 21. And you'll learn quite a lot more about it. Interesting alternative to VMware Cloud Foundation. Tom, there's a new big dog in the AI supercomputer space, and it doesn't run InfiniBand. xAI's Colossus is powered by 100,000 NVIDIA Grace Hopper GPUs, with plans to double that number. It took 122 days to design Colossus and only 19 days to install all the racks and go to the training. How do you run a massive project like that without InfiniBand? Well, that's thanks to SpectrumX Ethernet, the custom AI-focused version developed by NVIDIA. The core of the xAI SpectrumX network runs at 800 gigabits, and it's used to feed systems running the Bluefield 3 DPU in order to accelerate performance. Tom, I'm the AI guy, but you're the networking guy. So tell us a little bit more about your perspective on SpectrumX and this incredible Colossus.
You know, if this had been any other story that involved just building a big supercomputer, I would have been more than happy to let you talk about how amazing Grace Hopper is and all that other stuff. But when NVIDIA sent me the press release, they're like, oh, by the way, did we tell you that it's running on Ethernet instead of InfiniBand? And that's when my nerd flag went, oh, yeah, let's talk about this. So we've talked a lot about this all over the rundown for the last year. And I even recorded a Conversations episode last year talking about InfiniBand and kind of why I think that InfiniBand's reached its tap out point, basically. You know, you could never scale a cluster more than about 48,000 nodes because of the inherent limitations in the way that InfiniBand needs to work. And now we're looking at a cluster that's 100,000 nodes, and they're wanting to double that sometime in the next couple of years, according to the reports. I don't know about you, but the last time I checked the math, 100,000 is more than 48,000, which means we've got a scaling limitation. But if you read it in the press release that we're going to link in the show notes, NVIDIA does a great job of explaining that this isn't just Ethernet. Like, and I think everybody out there probably knows by now that this is not your typical gigabit, plug it into the side of your laptop Ethernet. Because there's too many things that Ethernet does poorly at this scale that would cause a lot of problems. This is SpectrumX, which is an enhanced version of Ethernet that is designed for these massive data center-like workloads that does things like, you know, congestion control and scheduling and packet spraying and all kinds of other stuff. But think of it like this. It's basically an Ethernet fabric. It is a custom network that is designed to run these things. Now, the exciting thing is that the switch that they've got running the core of this network, like you said, is an 800 gigabit per second switch. That's kind of speedy. I mean, it's the next tier right under terabit Ethernet. And I know that that's kind of like one of those watershed moments. If we can ever get switches to run efficiently at terabit speeds, that's going to be a big deal. But more importantly, they're running this to Bluefield 3 DPUs in the host machines, which means they are trying to accelerate and offload this IO as much as possible in order to enhance these kinds of communications. Because one of the biggest problems, I think most people out there who are fans of AI will know, is this tail latency problem. You can't finish a run until the last machine has reported all of its data back. And if there are even microseconds of difference, microseconds times 100,000 nodes is a lot of wasted CPU cycles. And so they're trying to enhance this as much as possible. I think, honestly, xAI wanted this to be a showpiece. They wanted to be able to say that they were running this on Ethernet, that they were trend setting, that, you know, they were really trying to make this a big deal. So I'm excited to see where NVIDIA is going to take this, because like I've said many, many times, I think the future of AI interconnects is Ethernet. And I think that if they can prove out that SpectrumX is actually going to do this at the kind of scale that people want it to be done at, that people are going to start shifting their workloads from InfiniBand to SpectrumX. And of course, NVIDIA is going to make a bigger mountain of money when they provide all of the networking hardware on top of all the AI hardware. And speaking of AI, it's kind of a hot area for chip manufacturers. I don't know if you've picked up on that undercurrent in the rundown. Everyone wants to get in on the action, of course. And one of the ways that companies are trying to skirt the rules to keep the money machine going is by finding ways to adjust the technology to evade export restrictions. And we've covered this on the rundown and many times. As you know, the US is restricting export of certain kinds of hardware and hardware manufacturing capabilities to China. But that doesn't mean that the companies aren't trying to get around all of those restrictions. They're getting really creative, like finding ways to buy a bunch of these chips through shell companies. Or there was a report in the linked article about how there's a passageway between two areas of a factory that one of them is very high security and one of them is not. And everyone's looking at this passage going, but what's to stop people from moving some product from one side to the other? And it's creating these kinds of issues that we've even seen where companies like TSMC have had to report that they discovered that someone that they sold chips to actually violated an export ban, and how that could get a lot of people in trouble. So, Stephen, we're getting into another one of those weird places where geopolitics is intersecting with tech again. What's your read on this?
Yeah, this is something, as you said, we've been talking about quite a long time on the rundown. Those of you who have been listening in for a while know that I'm really keen on reporting and investigating the whole manufacturing chain, especially when it comes to advanced ICs and advanced AI chips and so on. Well, as I have said many times, the US led export restrictions that are supposed to stop China from getting advanced semiconductor technology aren't going to work. And they're clearly not working. This incredible report, nice job, Dylan Patel, Semi Analysis, really lays it bare the many ways that Chinese firms are getting access to technology, but also the undercurrent of the whole report and the undercurrent of pretty much my take on this story is that the export controls themselves are going to lead to a perverse outcome in that China is going to develop their own homegrown capabilities that will eventually come around and challenge the rest of the world. And that's what we're seeing here. So, first off, on the export controls, they aren't working, as is laid out in detail in this report. The initial wave of export controls seemed like maybe it was going to have an impact. But if you look at the results from these companies, both in the West and in China, they are not being impacted dramatically by the export control regime. And in fact, many of the technologies that are supposed to be controlled are very easily getting around the ban. So, for example, as you mentioned, there's the case of a fab that has multiple buildings on the same property. One building is able to get advanced technology for legacy process nodes, and the other side is on the export control list because it's developing advanced process nodes. But they're literally connected in a clean room way, and wafers can pass back and forth between them. So there's no reason that the advanced materials technology that's being put into the open fab is not being used on the materials from the restricted fab. Similarly, there's a lot of examples given in this report of fabs that are literally located across the street from each other that appear to be basically just shell companies. This fab is able to get access to some advanced technology. This fab is on the control list. Well, what's to keep them from literally shipping that stuff across the street, either the machines or the products, in order to work on them? And that seems to be what's happening because essentially the second point is that China is rapidly developing their own homegrown technology that challenges what the Western companies are able to do. They're developing advanced fab capabilities, advanced process nodes. Now, some of those things aren't working out quite as well as the more established process nodes from TSMC and Intel and others, but frankly, in some ways, the Chinese are even ahead. And then that's the case in advanced RAM manufacturing. They may be ahead of the West. In other cases, they're rapidly catching up, finding out alternatives, figuring out ways of getting around these restrictions, and importantly, developing homegrown, home-controlled technology. Now, all of this is supported by the Chinese government, which is indeed the whole reason for these sanctions in the first place. But frankly, there's not a lot the West can do once China is able to develop their own homegrown technology. Frankly, the whole sanctions regime, in my opinion, should be reevaluated because it's just not working. And in fact, it's going to come back and bite the West on the, well, you know what, once China develops their own homegrown technology that is able to challenge the West in AI acceleration and CPUs and so on. Now, that's not going to happen for a little while, but it's going to happen, and the sanctions are making it worse. It's been a bad year for Microsoft on the security front. Between all the email compromises and password spraying attacks, the tech giant has gotten a black eye. It's so bad that Satya Nadella released a memo stating that employee pay would be linked to security expectations and milestones in some cases. And one of those cases appears to be his own. In a new filing with the SEC, Nadella has asked Microsoft board to reduce his incentive pay by 50%. Granted, he's only losing about $5.5 million, and he's keeping that much, but hey, it's a step in the right direction, and it's kind of nice to see a CEO taking personal responsibility for the failings of his company, right, Tom?
I think it is. I think this sends a message that he is taking the security issues at Microsoft seriously enough that he's literally willing to put money on the table to make it happen, right? Now, I totally agree. If you're responsible for security at a company and there is a breach, you need to feel the heat, as it were. And for him to have released this memo internally saying that if you are responsible for security and your security is breached, then your pay may be reduced or your incentive payment may be reduced because you didn't meet the security minimums that we expect. Good on you, Satya. I will say, however, though, compared to he makes $2.5 million in his base salary. His employee stock grant and all that other stuff that they use to sweeten the pot for CEOs was reduced by half. Oh no. He's going to make a little less money this week. I like the solution that was proposed in the article. Instead of it being a flat number or a percentage number of compensation, why don't we use the European Union model, which is we're going to fine you a percentage of the company's profits, of their gross margin. What if we find you a percentage of the real value of the security breach? There is a very funny story in there about an executive who got a speeding ticket, and his speeding ticket was it was in a Scandinavian country, and there they base the amount you pay your fine on how much disposable income you have, and he had to pay something crazy like $131,000. He managed to appeal it down, but evidently that made the man salty for years. Like, you couldn't bring it up in an interview or he'd be mad. Could you imagine what would happen if a regulatory body came in and said, oh yeah, you had some security failings. We're going to fine you 2% of your assessed net value. Like, do you think a CEO would take security very seriously if suddenly they weren't on the hook for $10,000, but might be on the hook for $10 million? I bet you they'd take it a lot more seriously. I bet you that people like, Jeff Bezos would really take security seriously if he would have to pay $50 million. Now, on the flip side of that, it doesn't really hurt people in the security space because 2% of your assessed net value is still a lot of money, but it's a lot easier to get hit for $20,000 at the low end than it is for $20 million at the high end. But we've got to put teeth in this, because I promise you, until we do, we're not going to see a massive shift in the way we think about security, because $5.5 million is a lot to pay. It's not a lot to pay if the person's worth $70 million. OpenAI is reportedly in talks with Broadcom to develop AI chips that are specific to OpenAI inferencing models, at least according to a Bloomberg report. The people that were sourced in that reporting said that OpenAI has also approached TSMC about these custom chips. This could be a big move away from the GPU-based models like the ones that we see favored by NVIDIA because of their dominance in the GPU market. Evidently, Wall Street liked the reporting as well, because stock prices for Broadcom and TSMC went up after the report was released. The question that I have for you, Stephen, is if OpenAI is looking to build custom chips that run their models and don't run on GPUs, could this be a shift in the market with OpenAI leading the charge?
Well, I think it's important to note here that the undercurrent of this story is simply that OpenAI is trying to diversify away from simply being reliant 100% on NVIDIA for the processors that are powering all of its popular AI applications. Previously we had heard that OpenAI was going to develop its own chips, its own foundries, challenge Intel and NVIDIA and AMD and Qualcomm and everybody else for chip dominance. Well, it seems like they're moving back a little bit from that and instead kind of focusing on diversifying their own supplier base. First off, they've started using AMD GPUs, which is real good news for Lisa Su and company in Round or Austin. They're, I'm sure, thrilled to see that OpenAI is buying more AMD GPUs. But they're also hiring a team of chip developers and signing deals with Broadcom and with TSMC to manufacture their own inferencing chips. Now, there's a word in there that's important, and that's inferencing. This is not to build a new training supercomputer. That's probably still going to stick with NVIDIA GPUs and NVIDIA's AI technology. This is for inferencing. This is for you and me running our queries against ChatGPT or whatever other model. And that is a market that not only is poised to explode, but is poised to diversify away from NVIDIA. So traditionally, NVIDIA has really had a lock on the training market with their incredible series of GPUs. But on the inferencing side, it is a little bit of a wide open market. Many companies are developing their own inferencing chips. For example, Google has their TPUs, including the Coral TPU that you and I could buy and run on a Raspberry Pi to do inferencing right now. Apple has their own very powerful NPU in the M series and the latest A series chips, and it's wowing the world, including with the recent announcement of the M4 and M4 Pro Mac Mini and iMac and presumably MacBook Pro laptops this week. And, Qualcomm, that was the basis of their incredible Snapdragon X and Snapdragon Elite. Intel is there. Grok is there with an amazing line of inferencing chips. All of this is to say that the inferencing world is not locked down like the training world is, and that's what OpenAI appears to be looking at here. Why Broadcom? Well, as we've heard at Tech Field Day events repeatedly, Broadcom is not just, the owner of VMware and the maker of many popular network switching platforms. Broadcom also has a very active and powerful chip design unit that can help customers put together custom chips. They are very much involved in this space already. In fact, many of the custom processing or processors that are out there in the market that are assigned to this company or that hyperscaler or this other OEM are actually developed very close with close cooperation from Broadcom because they have the talent to do it. And they also have the IP that they can put in those chip designs. So it makes sense if you were OpenAI that you would reach out to Broadcom and say, hey, we want our own tensor processing chip for inferencing. Broadcom would probably bring some AP or IP to bear to make that happen. It would also make sense to hire some folks who worked at Google. And that's exactly what OpenAI has reportedly done, some of the engineers who worked on the Google TPUs. And it would make sense to sign up TSMC as the manufacturer for those chips going forward. That's the gist of this story, and that's exactly what's happening. So this is no surprise. This is exactly what I would do if I was in charge of OpenAI. And frankly, it shows the direction of the whole market exploding and exploring new operations, new alternatives for inferencing chips. Earlier this month, we discussed the hacking group Salt Typhoon, which I think was one of the bad guys in the movie Pacific Rim, but maybe not. Anyway, they gained access to a lawful intercept recording data in a major US telecom companies. During the story, we discussed the far-reaching impact of intelligence gathering. This week, we saw reports that Salt Typhoon, oh wait, no, that wasn't in Pacific Rim. Anyway, that Salt Typhoon has been gathering data on US politicians, including somebody named Trump and somebody named Vance, as well as other parts of their campaign. This group has also compromised devices for the politicians on the other side of the aisle, including Mr. Chuck Schumer. Tom, is this just part of the same hack, or is this something else?
I think that we're starting to see the fallout of what happened when Salt Typhoon basically got in and was able to have unfettered access to all of this intercept data. This is one of the reasons why these hacks are so important to notice and to notify ASAP. Because we covered this story at the beginning of October, and I said they were not trying to steal, like, they weren't trying to get people's data. They were collecting intelligence for other things. And we're starting to hear rumors that that was the case. It would actually be very easy for me to, maybe if I had access to something like NSO's Pegasus, to be able to drop in there and just be able to continuously collect data. We're not seeing information that anything like that has happened. Although if it was good enough, we wouldn't even know. I think what they're actually doing, especially knowing that they were targeting political operatives, was they're collecting data to build better disinformation campaigns. Think about it. If I have access to all of your records and I can feed that data into a model of some kind, let's say it's using some kind of AI technology, I can specially craft disinformation along a certain prompt level to feed back to you that is so believable that you'll buy it, because it has just the right mix of, appealing to your, ego and feeding you information you might already believe, and then adding a little twist to it at the end. And note that I'm not specifically calling anybody out here on either side of the aisle. I can do this for any person in America if I have a model that's tuned well enough. Maybe a model that was sponsored by a government who doesn't have the same kind of controls on AI that we want to put in place. I wonder where one of those governments might exist. And I wonder if that government might not necessarily be friendly to ours. Who was the sponsor of Salt Typhoon again? Give you a hint. It wasn't Guillermo del Toro. It was China. And so I think that we're going to start seeing more and more of this. And the fact that this comes out 6 days before a U.S. national election tells me that at least the people who are doing the investigative work are very worried. CISA said they notified the parties immediately. And there has been a lot of talk in circles about these people using devices that are not hardened. Everybody remember when President Obama was carrying a BlackBerry and everyone was freaking out because, you can hack a BlackBerry, only it turned out that it was a hardened BlackBerry that had all kinds of things like turned off and ripped out and removed. Well, now you're running into the problem of what happens when you can't harden a device, because you need access to apps like social media and all kinds of other stuff. So I think that we're going to see more and more fallout from this. The question for me is how it will impact whoever holds that office in a few months. Are we going to be talking about the possibility that this could lead to massive disinformation campaigns? Or is it going to be one of those things where it's like, you tried to hack our devices, we need to sanction the people that you're sponsoring? I don't have a clear answer, and I don't think we're going to have a clear answer for months until we get to the bottom of this hack. But I'll tell you, it definitely does have egg on the face of the companies that were hacked, which, by the way, I love the fact that in this particular report, the companies were not named. But if you rewind the clock a month, they were named in the report with the same group that hacked them. So you can put 2 and 2 together and figure out which companies got compromised. So I don't know. We had a story we wanted to take a closer look at, and this could be fun, Stephen. The Hatfields and the McCoys, Lakers and the Celtics. GIF versus GIF. The rivalries of our time are very storied, but one of the biggest one seems to be cooling off finally. AMD and Intel have announced a new partnership aimed at countering the surge of ARM-based designs. The companies have agreed to standardize specs of the x86 instruction set to make it easier for ISVs to write code that runs on both AMD and Intel processors without the need to create that weird fragmentation because certain instruction sets don't exactly match up to the other one, which of course penalizes performance, irritates programmers, and makes them say, well, I just want to go write for ARM because ARM is ARM and I don't care anymore. Here's the thing though. this could have massive implications for the market because we've already seen a number of companies that have started to shift to using ARM for a variety of reasons, and that's left Intel and AMD kind of on an island being the champions of x86. Stephen, dogs and cats living together. Is this mass hysteria?
Well, Intel and AMD work together on a lot of things, and they're not the companies that they were back in the 90s and the 2000s when all of this rivalry came about. I think it is worth kind of remembering that time, though. So, as I think everyone in our audience is aware, Intel developed the what's called the x86 architecture back in the 70s and the 80s for personal computers, microcomputers, and many companies, including AMD, uh, really, well, I don't want to say copied, but really developed their own implementations of x86 that were pretty much compatible, but not entirely compatible. I don't want to say copied because in all of these cases, it was a legal reverse engineering, not a illegal hack or copy or something like that. But essentially, what we ended up with was Intel being in the catbird seat with x86 and a bunch of other companies trying to play catch up and trying to improve on the architecture and develop competing products. In some of those were more successful. I remember my beloved AMD 4x86 processor that was able to swap in instead of a 386, and some of them were not so great. But in 1999, AMD announced that they were building a 64-bit extension to x86. Now, at that time, Intel had already connected with others to develop what was called the Itanium architecture, which was supposed to replace x86 entirely. This new architecture was jointly developed by Intel and Hewlett Packard. It was going to be found in Unix systems. It was going to be the real deal, kind of, that old desktop stuff, push that aside and we'll have ourselves a real new modern platform. AMD took a different direction. They said, what if we figure out ways of extending x86 to have a 64-bit address space, new modern approaches to chip design, new modern approaches to hardware. And theirs was really successful. They developed their first Opteron and Athlon 64 processors and announced them real quick. And it very quickly became clear that Itanium or IA64 was really not going to get the kind of wide adoption that it should have. By that point, Intel was already working on their own implementation of AMD's 64-bit extension. They eventually settled on the name Intel 64, surprise, for their own 64-bit extension of x86. And that's kind of what you're using probably today. Even if you don't have that in your desktop or your mobile phone or your laptop, if you're a Mac user or whatever, you probably have it somewhere. I mean, it's the PlayStation CPU, it's the Xbox CPU, it's in a lot of servers, it's in, a lot of stuff. And frankly, it's pretty good. It's been expanded and extended by both AMD and Intel for many, many years, decades even. And it's gotten faster and faster. One of the big advancements was multi-core and hyper-threading. Lately, the big advancement is accelerated instructions. And yet, there are still differences in the underlying architectures between AMD and Intel that make it pretty difficult for low-level hardware engineers to work on the platform. Essentially, if you are developing an operating system or a video game or some kind of advanced software that really relies on the features of the 64-bit x86 platform, you've got to implement special, workarounds and use cases for Intel's CPUs versus AMD's CPUs, and that's not always easy to do. So that puts us to today. Today, Intel and AMD are going to join hands and they're going to create an advisory committee that will allow them to drive the x86 64 platform forward in a more friendly way. And this is being cheered by basically everybody in the industry because nobody wanted to see Intel and AMD doing this anymore when it comes to something as fundamental as the x86 instruction set. It's going to help everybody. It's a good thing. And like I said too, Intel and AMD, they work together on all sorts of stuff all the time. PCI Express and all sorts of other technologies. We talked about you know uh, CXL technology, for example. Intel and AMD are right there working together on those. Why not x86?
Well, I like the fact that you talked about the reverse engineering efforts. I can remember trying to decide if I was going to go with an Intel overdrive processor or a Cyrix X486 processor, and that should tell you how old I am. But I think it's kind of appropriate now to kind of mention why this whole thing came about. And I'm going to use one of my favorite examples of all time, Weird Al. Weird Al writes parody songs. We all know that, right? But he doesn't download the sheet music for the song he's parodying. He actually transcribes it by ear. And then he rewrites the lyrics to be about food or whatever, right? Well, that means that while the song is almost the same, minus the lyrics, there's still some musical differences that you can pick up on if you listen to the songs back to back, because it's not a clean copy. And because the lyrics are so catchy, sometimes people like Don McLean will accidentally sing the wrong lyrics to his own song in concert because he's actually singing Weird Al's lyrics. And that's why programmers are so friggin' frustrated, is because AMD and Intel have never collaborated on this architecture, which means AMD looks at what Intel's doing and goes, well, we can do that, but we've got to figure out how to do it first. So they're doing the same things slightly differently. If you've ever programmed or configured a switch or a router, you know how this feels, right? Like, I know what I want it to do, but why do you guys have to use two completely different command line architectures? It's because we're trying to create differentiation, right? Initially, this was all about lock-in. It was all about getting Intel getting people to write code for Intel's chips and not for AMD's chips, so that you could unlock all these special performance things. Anybody remember MMX on a Pentium, multimedia extensions? That was a way to force developers to write code for those chips only, because AMD and Cyrix didn't have MMX instruction sets. Fast forward to today, and now it's not, oh, you need to write for my chip. It's, I'm going to go write for this completely different architecture over here because I've had it. I'm done. To quote the seminal 1995 work Hackers, Acid Burn was right. RISC architecture really did change everything. I know I say that all the time, and it kind of sounds like a meme at this point, but it's true, because simplified instruction sets have effectively forced companies like Intel and AMD to rewrite the way they do instruction sets, because people that are learning how to write for instruction sets in school now don't want to write these big complicated things. They want to do something simple. They want to figure out how to iterate on that. And that's what you're seeing in the other side of the space, whether it's ARM processors, whether it's RISC-V or any other thing. They're all built around the same concepts. And then what's the alternative? Well, you go to AMD and you go to Intel, and they're like, well, you can get like 85% of it right, except these other 15% where the devil's in the details, and you're going to tear your hair out trying to figure out how to write for each of them. And that just means that people are going to be like, I don't care, I want to go to ARM. And I think that this is a very valuable tool for Intel and AMD, because if they can force people to write code that runs on both of these systems 95% the same, yes, they're going to lose some sales to their partner in AMD or Intel, whatever the case may be, but they're not losing that to an M4. They're not losing that to a RISC server architecture, because once those people leave, they don't come back.
Yeah, I think that that's really the undercurrent here. It's a signal from Intel and AMD that x86 is alive and well and thriving, and that x86 is not sort of a weird proprietary, diverse ecosystem, that it is a single platform, or it will be a single platform that companies can feel confident in going forward. It also hopefully will make things work better when new accelerated instruction sets are brought out and so on, which is something that Intel and AMD have been using historically to differentiate their products. For a long time, AMD's server CPUs were very, I don't want to say stripped down, but they were intended to be sort of straightforward workhorses, whereas Intel was adding all sorts of accelerated instructions and that do special purpose things and accelerate this or that application. Well, AMD has really jumped on that as well with their latest designs. They've even adopted very similar instructions in terms of accelerators in their latest server CPUs. And that has really helped a lot of applications, especially things, like AI, to work on server CPUs. Well, hopefully, this group will be able to make sure that things like AI inferencing instruction sets will be consistent across Intel and AMD, and that you'll be able to not have to go to an ARM slash GPU architecture in order to do AI work. So really what this is about shoring up the foundation under x86. It's about burying the hatchet between these two companies to some extent. Now, they will aggressively compete with each other in terms of hardware parts, in terms of announcements and launches and new components. And I expect that that's going to bring a wonderful new world of exciting, different directions in terms of AMD is going to do this with their efficiency cores and Intel's going to do that with their efficiency cores. But one thing we'll know for sure is that the software will run uniformly across them, and we won't have this weird environment where AMD does it this way and Intel does it that way, and we have to figure out how to reconcile those things. I think that it could be really good, but of course, the elephant in the room is ARM and RISC-V and the potential for the entire x86 ecosystem to get knocked off the pedestal. And Intel and AMD certainly don't want to see that happen.
No doubt we will hear more about this in the future. And when we do, we will, of course, cover it on the Gestalt IT Rundown. But that's in the future. Coming up, we have a lot of things. Now, the first thing I want to tell you is we have posted a lot of videos in the last month. Specifically, we have videos from AI Field Day, Edge Field Day, a networking field day exclusive event with Nokia, AI Data Infrastructure Field Day, and as mentioned at the top of the show, Cloud Field Day 21. So yours already like hours upon hours of video that you can go out and consume and learn about some of the exciting new technologies. And you better get that done this weekend, because next week I'm going to be in Silicon Valley doing Networking Field Day. And we're going to be talking to companies like Arista, Itential, Meter, Elicity, Aviz, and Path Solutions. So it's promising to be a pretty big event, and we're going to have a lot of great conversations and things like that going on. And then, Stephen, you've got something going on in 2 weeks, right?
That's right. We are going to, we are headed to KubeCon for AI, or for AppDev Field Day. We're pretty excited to be partnering with the Linux Foundation in covering KubeCon, in promoting the efforts of the Linux Foundation, the open source community generally, with our friends at TechStrong. And also, we will have some field day presentations. We have just announced that we will be seeing Kodiak, a brand new company, presenting at Field Day. We also have Heroku, who may be familiar with some of the audience, and Southworks presenting at AppDev Field Day 2 as part of, or in association with KubeCon. We're also doing some other fairly exciting things there. And Tom, Mobility Field Day is coming up too.
That's right. We wanted to get one more in before Thanksgiving, because we know that the Thanksgiving week is a time when people have the opportunity to kind of sit down and consume some content that's not football related or turkey related. So we have a great event. We're going to be talking to our friends from Cisco once again. We're also going to be seeing Nile at Mobility Field Day for the very first time. You've seen them before already this year, but we're going to let them try to wow the Mobility Field Day delegates with some of their wireless technology. That should be a really great discussion. The presenters are already excited. The delegates are already warming up. So you're going to want to pay attention there. There may even be some surprises in store. I know, I'm whetting your appetite. Just stay tuned to techfieldday.com for more information about that. And while you're there, make sure that you check out the lineup of 2025 events, because we've already started listing them on the website. If you click on the link for future events, it will show you everything that we have currently scheduled. Things like AI Field Day, Networking Field Day. We'll be adding more to that list very soon, because we're getting excited about what we've got coming up in store in 2025. Just like we're excited that you can join us every week. And as I mentioned last week, the rundown has been going for 7 years. We are happy that we have been running this podcast forever, And we are very happy that you continue to tune in and use us as your favorite source of news with a little bit of analysis and possibly bad jokes here and there. But the important thing is that you know where to find us on YouTube when our episodes go live on Wednesday in the afternoon. You know that you can find us in your favorite podcast application of choice just by looking for the rundown. And we'd love if you would subscribe, maybe leaving us a rating. Review helps more than anything because that reminds people kind of what we do here, that we have a unique take on things. And it also helps that we have such an amazing lineup of co-hosts that help us when I'm on the road or when Steven's on the road. I'm sure you'll see one of those next week because I'll be at Networking Field Day. But remember that, support all of our co-hosts as well, because, we want to continue to have them keep coming back and being a part of the fun around here. So for Stephen Foskett, myself, Corey, our wonderful producer, and everybody who helps us produce this episode on a regular basis, be safe. Watch out for Chinese password hackers in your Halloween candy. And until next week, we will see you on the Rundown.